Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We are looking at one of the absolute most feared organizations on the planet. This is a group that has triggered massive multinational law enforcement crackdowns, sparked severe geopolitical crises across the Americas, and fueled some incredibly intense political debate. We're talking, of course, about MS-13. And to understand exactly what we're dealing with, we really need to start with their chilling core directive.
Kill, rape, control. That is the alleged motto of MS-13, at least according to an FBI gang specialist who investigated them. As sources across the board detail, this is a group known for unimaginable brutality, horrific body mutilations, and ruling entire neighborhoods through absolute terror. You see, they don't just want to defeat their rivals, they want to make horrifying statements that ensure no one ever even thinks about crossing them again.
And this isn't just some isolated small-town problem either. Over 10,000, that's the estimated number of MS-13 members operating across 46 different states right here in the US today. They've spread way beyond the big cities where they first started, firmly entrenching themselves in quiet suburbs and communities nationwide. It's a truly pervasive national security issue.
In fact, they are so widespread and honestly so incredibly dangerous that back in 2012, the US Treasury gave them an unprecedented designation, a transnational criminal organization. Now, this was a massive deal. It empowered the government to aggressively target and freeze the gang's financial pathways worldwide. It literally placed what was fundamentally a street gang right alongside massive, highly structured international syndicates like the Mexican Zetas, the Japanese Yakuza, and the Italian Camorra.
Section 1. Origins, from war to LA.
Now, to understand how a local street gang became an international crisis on par with the Yakuza, we have to look back at how they started. And what's really fascinating here is that MS-13 did not start in Central America. They originated in the United States, specifically in Los Angeles. Back in the 1980s, hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing the bloody Salvadoran Civil War arrived in crowded LA neighborhoods. Shunned, marginalized, and frequently victimized by established Mexican-American street gangs, these young Salvadorans banded together. What started out as a desperate means of self-preservation and protection rapidly evolved into an incredibly violent organization. They adopted the name Mara Salvatrucha. Mara basically means gang, Salva is short for Salvadoran, and Trucha translates roughly to street smarts. They also added the number 13 to represent M, the 13th letter of the alphabet. Though law enforcement sources do note that the 13 can also signify a much darker, deadly execution method. 1 shot to the head and 3 to the body.
Section 2. The deportation pipeline.
So the leap from the streets of Los Angeles to a global threat is a fascinating yet tragic chain of events. And it brings us to a crucial question that marks a massive turning point in the story. How exactly did an organization born in California suddenly come to dominate countries thousands of miles away, turning places like Honduras and El Salvador into some of the most violent regions on Earth? Well, the answer actually lies in policy. During the 1990s, right at the height of the crack epidemic and the US war on drugs, the political climate heavily favored zero-tolerance criminal justice. The United States passed strict laws allowing for the aggressive mass deportations of convicted gang members, and often this was for nonviolent drug offenses or petty crimes. They were sent entirely back to El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. But instead of solving the problem, it basically poured gasoline on a fire. Finding weak institutions, extreme poverty, and fertile ground in Central America, these deported members used their US cachet to completely usurp local, less sophisticated gangs. The result? They absolutely exploded their Central American ranks. While the US numbers sit around 10,000, today, estimates put their numbers in Central America at over 60,000 members. Section 3. Blood in, blood out. To really grasp the sheer scale of this network, we have to understand how they operate on the ground and the terrifying methods they use to demand absolute, lifelong loyalty. Joining MS-13 isn't some casual decision, it's a blood pact. To earn a place in their ranks, a recruit who is often just a vulnerable teenager must be jumped in. This is a savage 13-second beatdown by multiple gang members, and it doesn't stop there. Afterwards, they must get wet, which is a gang term meaning they have to commit a violent crime, often murder, to definitively prove their worth to the organization. And while they definitely have access to modern firearms, MS-13 frequently utilizes machetes. Now, this is a tool familiar from Central American farms, but they've turned it into a deeply calculated instrument of terror. They use it to perform gruesome dismemberments and statement killings for a very specific reason. It ensures maximum psychological terror against rivals and the surrounding community. Operationally, though, they're actually quite different from the big cartels. Unlike highly structured, top-down international cartels that move tons of cocaine across borders, MS-13 operates as fragmented, localized cliques. They act almost like twisted proxy families for vulnerable, disenfranchised youth desperately looking for identity and protection. Their revenue, which Salvadoran authorities estimate at roughly $31 million a year, mostly comes from vicious neighborhood extortion, street-level drug dealing, and human trafficking.
Section 4. The political battleground. Because of this extreme, intimate neighborhood violence, MS-13 has become a massive, deeply polarized political flashpoint in the United States. The Trump White House, for instance, frequently pointed to MS-13's abhorrent crimes to advocate for strict immigration policies. Citing horrific cases, such as gang members hacking up teenagers in New York and gruesome decapitations in Maryland, the administration released statements and held briefings directly labeling the gang members as animals who actively exploit border weaknesses.
Now, this creates a pretty stark divide in how analysts view the root of the problem. On one side, there's a strong push for strict border enforcement, with proponents arguing the gang purposefully exploits open-door immigration loopholes to send established leaders north into the U.S. Conversely, other analysts present a systemic perspective. They point out that historical U.S. policies like the 1990s war on drugs and mass deportations, coupled with severe, unchecked foreign corruption, are exactly what created the gang's current size and ongoing cycle of violence in the first place. Supporting that systemic view, critics highlight the devastating impact of narco-corruption at the highest levels of government. Just look at former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez. He was actually once praised by U.S. administrations for cracking down on migration and being a tough-on-crime ally. But just weeks after leaving office, he was arrested, extradited to New York, and charged with smuggling massive amounts of cocaine into the U.S. For many, this proves that state-level corruption provides the exact chaotic environment where street gangs like MS-13 thrive and multiply.
Section 5. An endless war. Which brings us to the modern reality. The daily, grueling cat-and-mouse game between MS-13 and the law enforcement agencies desperately trying to dismantle them. Police use a multi-tiered approach here. First, local gang units track cryptic street graffiti and tattoos to map out territories and anticipate violence. Second, prosecutors use federal RICO conspiracy laws. RICO stands for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a powerful legal tool originally designed to take down the Italian mafia. It allows prosecutors to secure unyielding 25-year prison sentences for the entire gang leadership. And third, ICE runs massive deportation flights, nicknamed Con Air, to physically remove non-citizen members back to Central America.
Yet despite all these coordinated efforts, officers on the ground admit a pretty frustrating reality. Deportation is rarely a deterrent. Gang members routinely pool their illicitly gained extortion money to pay cartel-connected smugglers, easily crossing the border to return to the U.S. Sometimes they're back operating in American neighborhoods within just weeks of being deported. It is literally an unrelenting revolving door. Which leaves us with a profound and honestly pretty unsettling reality. With MS-13 continuing to thrive on a complex web of deep poverty, broken communities, state-sponsored narco-corruption, and an endless deportation loop, we have to ask, can a transnational gang like this ever truly be eradicated? Or are we just watching a new generation gear up to keep this violent cycle spinning? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.